Hello everyone. Some of you might have seen recent news that China unexpectedly withdrew over $300 billion of equity from U.S. market in further escalation of the financial warfare between China and U.S. Let's talk about what does it mean for Chimerica and for the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. Also, we will touch on who, and when, will knock U.S. dollar from its reserve currency perch. Will be an interesting discussion. 5 Chinese state-owned companies are being delisted from U.S. stock exchanges, and more major Chinese players are about to be cut off from U.S. financial markets. Reuters reported. Oil giant Sinopec, China Life Insurance, Aluminium Corporation of China, PetroChina and a separate Sinopec entity, Sinopec Shanghai Petrochemical Company, each said they would apply to delist their American depository shares this month. They will keep their listings in Hong Kong and mainland China. The last sentence is very important. We will come back to it later in this video. Chimerica is under a lot of stress and may be at a breaking point. For those unfamiliar, Chimerica is a term describing tight connections between economies of US and China. Most of the recent news about China were revolving around Taiwan. As always, legacy media is using fear to get attention. Let's be very clear. An armed conflict between US and China is very unlikely, so we don't have to worry about World War III anytime soon. At least not between China and US. It's a big topic, but in short, given the interdependency of both countries, it's almost a zero probability. Chinese economy depends on US buying and US needs China to equip and finance its military. Nevertheless, there is a lot going on between China and US under the surface that can and will affect most investors like us. Technology wars, info wars, geopolitical rivalry and alliances, and many other invisible to the general public conflicts. But in today's episode we will only focus on financial markets. Especially Chinese derivative and bond markets, as these will be a key to a possibility for Chinese renminbi to compete with US dollar as a reserve currency. Let's talk. Fortune magazine in its article "The Writing is on the Wall for Chimerica on US stock exchanges as $318 billions of Chinese equity flees Wall Street," gives us a bit of history about these events. For months, U.S. federal regulators have increased pressure on Beijing and Chinese companies that trade on U.S. stock exchanges to comply with American listing rules. U.S. was putting a lot of pressure of China during last few years, attempting to deny Chinese businesses access to U.S. capital markets. So why did the Chinese state-owned companies decide to exit now? After all, they could have played a stalling game for years. They have been doing just that for a long time. U.S. still has liquid financial markets, and access to capital is an important tool for big corporations. So why now? The answer: China is ready. It is tempting to say it's just a knee-jerk reaction to Taiwan challenge by U.S. There is an element of that too, I am sure, but this is not the reason. We have to keep in mind that China is very different from the rest of the world. It is still a communist country, and anyone familiar with the political and economic process would know that China has a master plan spanning decades. Their political system allows for long-term continuity of political leadership, so they can and do plan very long-term. It's a big topic, and if you are curious, you can research China's 5-year plan process, or you can drop a line in the comments. If we have enough interest, I will make a separate episode on that. It's very interesting and very different political process compared to what we have in US or the West in general. It has a lot of advantages and pitfalls, but it's a long story. Back to the Reuters quote from the beginning of the article. These Chinese companies will keep their listings in Hong Kong and mainland China. This part is the most important. When companies of this size and importance make a move like that, it is a statement. China was building its capital markets by developing its banking and financial infrastructure for a very long time. It has been consolidating its control over Hong Kong for the last couple of decades and now is basically in charge of its economy. Hong Kong has been the main Asian financial hub for decades and has established financial infrastructure. By some metrics, Hong Kong Stock Exchange is the fastest growing financial market in Asia. With control over Hong Kong financial markets and with growing importance of domestic financial markets like Shanghai, Beijing, and Shenzhen stock exchanges, China positioned itself as a direct competitor to US. Shanghai Stock Exchange alone is the third largest stock exchange in the world. To demonstrate the reach of Chinese financial influence in the world, let's explore just one example. It might surprise you. Hong Kong Stock Exchange. We will see the real scope of this conglomerate and who actually owns it. Let's take a look at ownership first. Wikipedia shows, the stock exchange is owned by Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing Limited, HKEX, a holding company, that in 2021 became world's largest financial market operator in terms of market capitalization, surpassing Chicago-based CME. Let this sink in. CME is the biggest derivatives operator in U.S. U.S. derivative market is what makes U.S. financial system so liquid and stable. When a speculator or producer in U.S. is buying a call or selling put, this financial product is offered by CME. Or let's put it another way. Without entity like CME, U.S. financial markets as we know them would not exist. If China wants to have deep and liquid financial infrastructure, they will need a similar entity of a similar size and scope. And now they have it. Accidentally, well-developed, transparent and liquid capital infrastructure is a requirement for reserve currency. One of the reasons US dollar is so widely used is US capital market, especially bond market. US treasuries and bonds allow for capital to move and be parked basically without any limits as far as amount concerned, but also without major losses and risks. All of this is a byproduct of deep and liquid capital infrastructure. Chinese mainland exchanges are still not completely open to foreigners, and that precludes a wide use of renminbi as a reserve currency. But the ball is in the Chinese court. They can act on those restrictions and remove capital controls as they feel ready. Basically, China holds a key to the question of when US dollar loses its reserve status. Sheer size of Chinese economy and the importance in international trade will force international players to use renminbi. The fate of US as a reserve currency rests with readiness of China to flip the switch. But back to the Hong Kong Exchange and its holding company. What else this HKEX holding company owns? Let's take a look at another Wikipedia article. Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing Limited, HKEX, operates a range of equity, commodity, fixed income and currency markets through its wholly owned subsidiaries, the Stock Exchange of Hong Kong Limited, SEHK, Hong Kong Futures Exchange Limited, HKFE, and London Metal Exchange, LME. Old Good LME is owned by Hong Kong Company. Now, for the punchline, another Wikipedia article. The Hong Kong government is the single largest shareholder in HKEX, and has the right to appoint 6 of the 13 directors to the board. As we all know, since 2019 China basically appoints its representatives to govern Hong Kong. So by controlling Hong Kong government, China basically controls HKEX, which is biggest derivative provider in Asia and the world. And as a cherry on top, HKEX owns bunch of other financial institutions throughout the world, including iconic legacy financial institutes in the West. Full stop. Now it doesn't mean US or UK can't just arrest HKEX, share of LME or some other interests of Chinese government if they feel threatened. They can and they did. Without court orders or due process. Ask Putin as he would hold his assets in American bank. But for now, we see only posturing antics with shipping Pelosi to Taiwan to annoy Beijing and such. But the reality is that the power is slowly but surely is shifting to the east. From US and UK to Russia, China, India, Iran, Turkey and so forth. The world is moving towards many centers and multiple poles of regional power. Back to the importance of the delisting of biggest Chinese companies from US exchanges. The list is not limited to those 5 state-owned enterprises. Reuters reported. Some of China's largest companies, including Alibaba Group Holdings, JD.com Incorporated and Baidu Incorporated are among them. New York-listed Alibaba said last week it would convert its Hong Kong secondary listing into a dual primary listing, which analysts said could ease the way for the Chinese e-commerce giant to switch primary listing venues in the future. As you can see, Chinese business is leaving US capital markets. These are the biggest companies in the world. These companies pay actual dividends, have real profits. Some of them are monopolies in a growing market. Not to mention they service over 1.4 billion customers domestically and much more internationally. These companies have a potential to become the biggest companies in the world and overtake current market leaders. As prominence of these companies grow, the flow of capital will turn towards east at ever-increasing pace. We can see the results of that already. Some major Western companies are testing waters and list on Hong Kong to attract capital. One of the examples is Budweiser, American household name. In 2019 they raised $5 billion from its IPO debut in Hong Kong. As we can see, exit of these major Chinese companies from US capital market are much more than eye for eye payback for Taiwan escalation. US is trying to assert its dominance by limiting access to its financial markets while East is opening up and building alternatives to established Western controlled arrangements. By basically imposing capital controls through sanctions on Russia, Iran, China, Turkey and so forth, US in fact undermines one of the foundational tenets of its reserve status. Reserve currency is supposed to be neutral, transparent and freely transferable. I can't tell for sure if US is just governed by incompetent and arrogant, or if it an act of desperation, or a well-planned deeply hidden strategy. But what I conclude from the actions by US government, we are heading for a major reset and that the days of US financial dominance are over. I would finish by quoting Fortune headline again but will modify it slightly. Instead of the writing is on the wall for Chimerica on US stock exchanges, I would say the writing is in the wall for US dollar as a reserve currency as US retching up its use of dollar as weapon. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and like if you find this content interesting and useful. I post videos regularly and would love to offer you more content like this. Until next time.